And you know what? I agree with you 100%.
Thank you,
People
man.
don't know that the Democrats is the party of the KKK.
Yep.
People don't know that the Republicans are the party that freed the slaves.
Yep.
No, this isn't it. He's only telling half the story, and that presents a gross misrepresentation of history. Let's get into it. So it's April 2026, and in an interview, a car interview with entertainer Amber Rose, entertainer Nick Cannon made some ill-informed statements concerning the Democratic and the Republican Party. Now, he said the Democratic Party is the party of the KKK, and the Republican Party is the party that freed the slaves, making an insinuation that the Democratic Party is less for black people and the Republican Party is more for black people. But he seems to be only aware of half the story and not the full historical story.
Music licensing reimagined.
Let's listen and then we'll break it down.
Republican Party?
That's right. Former Democrat, former liberal.
Yeah.
I was a liberal Democrat my whole life.
Is that because the bag has got so intense and so heavy that you had a whole nother, you up there with the elite now? Or?
Not even close. Not even close. Democrats don't care about black people.
Okay,
And they don't care about people. They don't care about people of color. And the Republicans do. And that's the misconception.
And you know what? I agree with you 100%.
Thank you,
People
man.
don't know that the Democrats is the party of the KKK.
Yep.
People don't know that the Republicans are the party that freed the slaves.
Yep.
I mean, both of you and I have some conservative views. You just a little bit more outspoken about it than I am. And I honestly don't subscribe to either party. I rock with W.E.B. Du Bois when he said there's no such thing as two parties. It's just one evil party with two different names.
This clip is from the Roland Michael channel, and the link will be in the description. The KKK was created in 1865, which is the same year that the 13th Amendment came into being, which the 13th Amendment is the amendment that freed blacks from chattel slavery in the United States, put an end to chattel slavery in the United States. Many of the people that joined the KKK were Democrats, and they were racist. But what happened is that there was a shift in the ideology of both the Republican and Democratic parties over time. At first, the Republicans were the progressives, and they were anti-slavery. But as time progressed after 1865, there was a shift where the Republicans became conservative and became pro-slavery, and the Democrats became progressive and anti-slavery. So the same Republican Party that freed the slaves during Abraham Lincoln's time is not the same Republican Party that's around today. They basically flipped. So to say the Democratic Party is the party of the KKK is inaccurate, because the Democratic Party back then, past tense, was different than the Democratic Party that exists today. Back then, in the past, they were conservative and pro-slavery. The Republican Party back then, during the time of Abraham Lincoln, did help to free the slaves, but then the Republican Party flipped, switched, and took a pro-slavery stance. And that's the party, the Republican Party, that you see existing today in 2026. Those pro-slavery Democrats moved over to the Republican Party and essentially became Republicans. This information is not hard to find. You should be able to find it in a high school social studies textbook, because this is where I learned this information when I was in high school. A good book that also covers the topic is From Slavery to Freedom by John Hope Franklin. Let's check out this article from history.com. It breaks it down. It's entitled How the Party of Lincoln, because they always say the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln, won over the once democratic South. So it's letting you know right there from the title that the parties switched ideologies. Jumping down in the article, it reads, to understand some of the reasons the South, remember the South was the ones during the Civil War that advocated for slavery to keep slaves, to understand some of the reasons the South went from a largely Democratic, so the South used to be the Democrats, the slave advocates, region, to a primarily Republican area. So the South switched from Democrat, the South were advocates of slaves, to Republicans. And they were still advocates of slavery. So the ideologies shifted. So the Republicans became the ones that were advocates of slavery. So the same Republican Party that you see today isn't the same one that was around back then, which was the Republican Party of Lincoln. The Republican Party became the party of pro-slavery. Finishing up, it says, just follow the decades of debate over racial issues in the United States. And it had to do with the debate over race. Jumping down in the article, it says the Republican Party back then was strictly a regional party, meaning that it just did not exist in the South. So at the time, the Republican Party didn't exist in the slave advocating South. It was really in the North, he says. The South couldn't care less about immigration, but it did care about preserving slavery. So it lets you know that the South were the advocates of slavery. Jumping down in the article, it says, up until the post-World War II period in 1940s, the parties, meaning the Democratic Party at the time back then, hold on the region, meaning the South, the region, was so entrenched that Southern politicians usually couldn't get elected unless they were Democrats. So back then, the South, the pro-slavery people were Democrats. But when President Harry S. Truman, a Democratic Southerner, introduced a pro-civil rights platform at the Democratic Party's convention in 1948, a faction walked out. So in other words, this is where the switch happened. So you had this Democratic president and he said, hold on, let's not be pro-slavery, let's be anti-slavery. And because of that, a huge portion of the Democratic Party back then walked out. They separated, and let's find out what happened and where they went. It reads on, it says, these defectors, meaning the people, the pro-racist people, the pro-slavery people that left the Democratic Party, these defectors, known as Dixiecrats, held a separate convention in Birmingham, Alabama. So because this Democratic president at the time was trying to introduce civil rights for black people and be anti-slavery, you had a huge part of those Democrats back then separate and leave the Democratic Party. Reading on, it says, they nominated South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond, a staunch opposer of civil rights, to run for president on their states' rights ticket. Although Thurmond lost the election to Truman, he still won over 1 million popular votes. So people were for this pro-slavery thing. It was the first time since the Civil War that the South, pro-slavery people, was not solidly Democrats. It is where the shift starts to happen, the change starts to happen, Garfield says, and that began the corrosion of the Southern influence of the Democratic Party. So this is when the Democratic Party started to change from pro-slavery to anti-slavery. Jumping down, it says, after that, the majority of the South, pro-slavery people, still continued to vote Democratic because it thought of the Republican Party as the party of Abraham Lincoln and Reconstruction. And Abraham Lincoln at the time eventually stood for getting rid of slavery and rebuilding the country in a civil rights way. And they weren't for that. The big break didn't come until President Johnson, another Southern Democrat, so there's a Democrat now, so that this, again, it's shifting. A Democrat signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, so that everybody, blacks included, and so on, could have civil rights and could vote. So now the Democrats are saying, look, we're going to be anti-slavery and pro-black. Let's find out what happens. Though some Democrats who were pro-slavery at the time had switched to the Republican Party prior to that, so those pro-slavery Democrats became Republicans. Though some Democrats had switched to the Republican Party prior to this, the defection became a flood after Johnson signed these acts, Garfield says, and so the political parties began to reconstitute themselves. So in other words, a lot of these pro-slavery Democrats joined the Republican Party and they took their pro-slavery ideals with them. So now the Republican Party becomes the party of the South, or the pro-slavery party, while the Democrat Party, the ones that are left in the Democrat Party and blacks joining the Democratic Party, are anti-slavery and pro-civil rights. And that's what we see today. So the parties both went through a transformation and switched positions. We're reading it right here. So the Republican Party that we see today is not the party of Abraham Lincoln, because the Republican Party back then was progressive, pro-diversity, pro-civil rights. And then there was a switch. So now the Republican Party today is conservative and not so much about diversity, as we're going to see in a little while. And to finish it up, it reads, by the time Ronald Reagan became president in 1980, the Republican Party's hold on the white Southerners were firm. Remember, the white Southerners were anti-black civil rights and pro-slavery. So the Republican Party switched over to being the Southern Party, the party of slavery and the party of anti-civil rights. Today, the Republican Party remains the party of the South, pro-slavery, anti-civil rights, so on. It's an ironic outcome considering that a century ago, white Southerners would have never considered voting for the party of Lincoln and it shows you again, there was a switch in the party. And this is not an endorsement of either party because this is not a political show and both parties have their issues. But let's examine this.
The elite now?
Not even close. Not even close. Democrats don't care about black people.
Okay,
and they don't care about people. They don't care about people of color. And the Republicans do. And that's the misconception.
So in a general sense, that's just a lie. Republicans care about people of color. I don't know how she could come to that conclusion, given the Republican track record as a group. Check this out. This Indian politician, Republican politician, Vivek Ramaswamy, talking to Republican political commentator and culture about his running for office.
Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian.
Here's Vivek Ramaswamy at a Turning Point USA Republican event, speaking about himself running for governor of Ohio. Let's see their reaction to him.
Jesus Christ is God, and there is no other God. He is part of the Holy Trinity, and any other God is a demon, and it's false. How can you represent the constituents of Ohio who are 64% Christian if you are not a part of that faith? If you are an Indian, a Hindu.
If you are an Indian, they said it straight out. So where's the Republicans caring about people of color or even caring about people of color more than the Democratic Party does? There's that story back in 2025 from the Young Republicans group chat. It says, quote unquote, I love Hitler. Leaked messages expose Young Republicans' racist chant. Thousands of private messages. So when they're amongst themselves alone in private, this is how they communicate with each other. Thousands of private messages reveal GOP leaders joking about gas chambers, slavery, and that word. I'm going to keep the language clean. Jumping down in that same article. This is from Politico, by the way, but you can find this story anywhere, obviously. It reads, in this group chat, this Young Republicans group chat, it says they referred to black people as monkeys and the quote-unquote watermelon people. So where you get in, Republicans care about black people and Democrats don't, and so on. And did Republican leadership speak out against this racism? Here's what Vice President J.D. Vance had to say, who's a Republican himself.
Focusing on what kids are saying in a group chat, grow up. I'm sorry, focus on the real issues. Don't focus on what kids say in group chat. The reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys. They tell edgy, offensive jokes. Like, that's what kids do. And I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives. And at some point, we're all going to have to say, enough of this BS.
By the way, the people in that group chat weren't just kids. A lot of those people were in their 30s. And this is the way you treat racism? Oh, they're just silly jokes. Boys will be boys. What part of this shows that the Republican Party cares about black people and people of color? Then here's another Republican group chat in the following year, 2026. This is from Florida. This is a second group chat they discovered, Republicans. It says, this is from the Guardian. It says, Florida College Republican group chat reveals racist text. Racism again. Avoid the coloreds. You know, that's talking about black people. Like the plague. That's one of the things they said in the group chat, among many other things. In leaked chats, students of Florida International University referenced Nazis and made anti-Semitic and racist remarks. You're starting to see a pattern here. It's a sad thing to be miseducated and to believe that some party is for you or for your people when they're not. Here's Republican commentator Nick Fuentes.
You've also said you don't want to live near black people. Let's take a listen to this clip.
I'm a new generation of white person. I'm not living around blacks. Sorry. You know, I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry.
Here's Erica Kurt, the Republican leader of Turning Point USA.
Don't let anyone disenfranchise you because you're a young man, especially a young white male man. Don't ever let anyone talk down to you. We need strong men out there. Especially a white male, huh?
A little while ago, they were chanting All Lives Matter. What happened to that? There's a Newsweek article from 2024. It's entitled Gay Black Republican Leaves Party. I was betrayed, leaves the Republican Party. Read the highlighted part. It says, Rob Smith, who is a fairly well-known, is a fairly well-known black Republican, a gay and black conservative who was heckled and called racist and homophobic slurs while attending a MAGA event last year. MAGA being the Republicans that are hardcore following Trump, said he was leaving the Republican Party. So it shows you at this Republican event, he was called racist slurs and heckled. Under normal circumstances in years past, the Department of Education investigated racial issues or racial attacks or harassment on students. Let's take a look at this report from Brittany Page.
Just look at this new reporting from ProPublica. Quote, monkey sounds, white power, and the N-word. Racial harassment against black students ignored under Trump. Since Trump returned to office, the Education Department's Civil Rights Office has not resolved a single racial harassment investigation. It sends a message that people impacted by racial discrimination don't matter, one attorney said. Now, interesting, you guys. Why is it, do we think? Let's have a little brainstorm session here. Why is it that we think black students who are victims of violent racist abuse are not important enough for the Trump administration to act, while they're simultaneously calling out for white men to come forward with claims of discrimination at work?
This is an article from NBC News, and it reads, the title, U.S. Removal of Panels Honoring Black Soldiers at World War II Cemetery in the Netherlands Draws Backlash. The panels removed at the Netherlands American Cemetery comes after President Donald Trump, Republican president, issued a series of executive orders ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So how are you saying the Republican Party cares about black people when they're literally hiding and erasing black people's history? Here's another article from CBS News. It says, slavery panels, this is from 2026, January. Slavery panels of slavery displays removed from Philadelphia historical site after Trump directive, because at this particular site they had some history of slavery, black history, but it was removed by the Trump directive, which Trump is a Republican, the Republican Party. So again, how do Republicans care about black people? And finally, let's hear what the king himself, who all these Republicans admire, including Donald Trump, the political commentator Charlie Kirk, has to say in his rant about black people.
Of course we pander to blacks. They're in every TV commercial. They get more privileges to come into society. They come into every college on preferential with lower test scores. You can't ever say anything negative. You can lose your job. You will have your entire life obliterated if you say something racist.
So there should be no consequences for saying something racist. You should just be able to go on as usual. You hearing this? So please, let's educate ourselves as a people before we make statements, before we make any statements. And remember, the best way to not be deceived, subjugated, and taken advantage of is to stay educated.